It is Steve. Will you come out with me? I want Steve and Andy and Marcino come out first. Okay. Please help me welcome the directors of the film, Stephen Apcon and Andy Young, and the story consultant, Marcina. Come on. This is good. You three. Don't sit, because I want to bring other people from the movie out. Please welcome Famizio, Hen Alon, and Suleiman Khatib. Can you step? We're going to give you golden thumbs. Nope, something special, all right? They are golden thumbs, but, yes. For the very first time, they are inscribed Ebert Humanitarian Award. And I have one other thing for you. These are Roger's handkerchiefs. And I want you to take them to Israel.
And Palestine.
And Palestine. I would like to present one to you.
Thank you.
One to you.
Thank you.
You will take them to New York.
Thank you so much.
One to you.
Thank you.
One to you.
Thank you.
And they're just enough. I'm keeping this one. It will go in the Roger Ebert Center. And the other thing I want to do is bring some of you on stage, please, because it takes a village. I need about 20 people to go to this door and come up on stage with me. Doesn't matter who, please come up. If you're open and willing to come up on stage for peace, just go through that door and come up.
Chaz,
I know this is very dangerous to take the mic from you at your festival,
No, you
But-
go right ahead.
but on behalf of, actually, why don't you guys make this presentation to Chaz and to Nate? Five of these must make a hand or something, I don't know.
Thank you. Come on. I want some at this end and some.
Yeah. And to Nate, to Chaz and to Nate.
We want to give you the shirt of Combatants for Peace. And as you can see, Chase and Nate, our icon, how you call it, yeah? Logo is two men. Actually, it's Suleiman and myself here in the logo. But the thing is that we are throwing our M16 and looking at each other in the logo. And we are inviting Israelis and Palestinians to do the same, these two actions at the same time, to throw the gun and to look at each other. That's the only way we offer. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to invite people from Ebertfest on stage because in order to change the story, you have to make a conscious decision like they did. What they did is so brave, it's not accepted everywhere, but we stand with you for peace. The people on this stage stand with you for peace and with you for the changing of the story. It takes a village. That's why I wanted them here. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
Now we have to do a Q&A.
So, yeah.
Nate, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's beautiful. Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming up to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for coming up. Thanks for coming up to be with them. Thank you. We will. Okay.
We'll move mics around. They're going to bring out chairs, I think.
They're bringing out the chairs. And I just want you to just put it, and we're gonna frame this one. I just want you to put it in the pocket as the inaugural humanitarian. And
Chaz, thanks for
there were just enough in that packet. That wasn't even planned. I have to tell you that it's hard for me to say in, so I might say in.
You can say either hen, ken, or chen. You don't have to say chen.
Okay.
Hand's probably the best.
I can say Hen and Suleiman.
Suli.
Suli.
It's easier to
Okay, all right. Let's have a seat.
Where do you want to be, Chaz?
I want you right next to me here. You, well, I want you to sit with them.
Okay. Does it work?
Yes, because I'm going to have you taking,
Okay, great.
I'm going to have you sort of taking the lead.
can I get here?
I would like to ask Hen, Alan, and Suli Khatib first, before we get into going back for the filmmaking, tell us today, give us sort of an update on Combatants for Peace.
Hi, thanks guys for hosting us here today, and thank you, Steve, Andy, for the great film. We're still excited, so I'm trying to
gain time.
Yeah. Actually, the good things about, I'm typically optimistic person. The good things about our movement, non-violence joint Israeli-Palestinian movement, that's in 2016, the main thing that we're doing every month, something we call it the Freedom March. If you go to our website, to our Facebook page, and give us a like, please. It's this is what we do every month, alongside with many other organizations. We believe that we can't make change alone, so we cooperate with other organizations, and that part you've seen in the film from last year and the year before, with the small demonstrations that became now bigger, and we had hundreds of people joining us. And this is very in our top priority in 2016, and we believe that we have to create this momentum that our people, both people, come together in order to break down the barriers and the walls and to live in freedom and peace, because we look for dignity. That's simply our background, our story.
First of all, me too, I'm very moved, and I feel that the movie, the film said it all. Like there is, I feel like I need more breath to say new things after the film. But to add to what Suli was saying about the Freedom March, which is, as we call it, in Combatants for Peace, we have two main paths that we are walking along. Two journeys. One is the dialogue and the reconciliation and the humanization, or as we call it, the rehumanization. And the other one is I would say, the developing or the ongoing strategizing of the nonviolence culture, nonviolent struggle against the occupation. And so Suli was referring to the Freedom March, which is clearly part of our journey and as nonviolent movement. But in 2 weeks from now, we're going to have an Israeli-Palestinian joint memorial service that you saw in the film. And I was lucky to be the first director of this ceremony 11 years ago, when we just founded the movement. And we had like 70 people in the smallest fringe theater in Tel Aviv. And last year, we had 3,500 people in the biggest hall in Tel Aviv. So we ask you again, after you do the like that Suli asked you, to go into our Indiegogo campaign and on Facebook too, to help us to support this unique, and I think it's the only place in the world and the history that conflicted people were mourning and memorizing an evening for their loss while the conflict is still bleeding. So if we need any support for that, thank you.
I just wanted to add to that it was very difficult to finish this film because actually there is even more momentum with what these guys are doing and what they're facing today. In both societies, there is a lot of pushback against this. There is quite a bit of harassment and other things going on within Israeli society against any peace activism or even nonviolence. there was an action that they had that was to protest a settler road that was going in recently. This is last Friday. And they weren't allowed to do this because the military had issued they closed it as a military zone for the day because they knew this demonstration was coming. The combatants tried to plant one small olive tree as a symbolic statement. And 4 of them were arrested. 2 of them were shot with rubber bullets. One of them was Mohammed, the guy you see in the film. But their work continues and continues. The reason why we actually finished the film was because of Chaz. See, we really could have kept going on. And we were in Israel recently, back in January, and we were going to finish the film. We were shooting some things for the film. And something happened in Tel Aviv, and Marcina and I wrote about it and put it on Facebook. And Chaz read it and sent a note immediately and said, when is this film going to be finished? I want to see it. So we gave her a date, and the date was March 10th. And she said, okay, I'm going to come to New York and see it. And then, and then we had to finish it. And we literally finished it a couple days before Chaz arrived to see the film. So thank you.
I'm speechless. I thought it was just a hard date, that's the date that was set. I want to ask why you did this film. What made you decide to go shoot for 2 years of your life, you and Andy, and then I want to get to Marcina about the story consulting part of it, but what was your impetus for doing this?
Well, I had been asked several years ago. I've been in dialogue for several years with a group of people, and they were very interested in the Middle East and what was going on. And actually, they came from an orientation of wondering whether Israel was getting a fair portrayal in the media. But they were very open. And Andy and I went over and we did sort of a research trip. And we met with people from all over the political spectrum, really as much as we could on both sides. And came to the conclusion that it wasn't an issue of it being misrepresented. It was really an issue of people being stuck in their own narrative. And it was true on both sides, and there was this cycle of perpetrator and victim. And sometimes you couldn't even tell who was where, but you understood that they were both stuck in the same cycle. And we met, along the way, we met these guys. And I remember sitting with Chen in a cafe in Tel Aviv once, and Andy and I were there having coffee. And I asked Chen, what's this organization really about? And he said, we're a community of people taking responsibility for our own creation. And that's what you talk about, Chaz, with stories and understanding where we get stuck. So seeing that they understood this idea of being stuck in a national narrative and had gone through this incredible transformation, we came back and knew that was the story we wanted to tell, and that really launched us. And what's amazing is that sometimes you meet subjects of a potential film and you don't know whether there's... Guillermo del Toro would say this in a different way than I'm going to. Don't you fucking think so? But sometimes you meet subjects, and after the second or third date, the tarnish starts to show. And at every step along the way, as we got into this film, everything that you see in this film with these guys and how courageous they are and how authentic they are, and the journey that they've traveled is even more so in real life than what you see on the screen. So we were in.
I'll just add to it that my knowledge of the region was really limited to what I had consumed on television news. So I had kind of a CNN portrait of the region, of the conflict. And the first time, we had the meeting with Chen, we were invited to a Combatants for Peace activity, which was a workshop in a hotel in the West Bank. And all of a sudden, I was in a room with 60 Israelis and Palestinians doing theater and trust exercises together. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I realized I was looking at something that, a story that I had never been exposed to before. There was nothing reaching back to everything I had been seen about the region that had prepared me for what I was seeing at that moment. And that was the moment that convinced me that we had to tell this story and bring it to audiences that haven't seen it before, because our views are so shaped by what we are fed. And politicians have discovered that fear gets them votes, and news media has discovered that fear sells advertising, and those things continue to shape the cycle that we're trapped in. And yet here was a completely different story, and it wasn't being told. They were completely off the radar of the news media. And from that moment, I think we were in completely. Yes.
With this movie, one of the things that we really wanted to look at was using Combatants for Peace as an example, as a micro-macro, so that it was like moving and seeing that their conflict is a conflict, the same conflict that we have in our own country and inside of ourselves, and being able to have people really identify with it, and so that it doesn't get stuck in just one place, but to actually show them in their love and their courage that they need to have in order to walk through some of the most difficult things that we need to walk through. A lot of people say that we don't have the answer to conflict, but we do. And we all know what it is. And so it's only our desire, and when we get to the point where we really accept that the way to get there is through love. And these guys exemplify it, and it's something that was really important for us to bring through this film. And it's Disturbing the Peace was an interesting name, because we, up until like the last minute, we were trying to decide whether to use it or not. And somebody says it wasn't sexy enough. But the idea was that, one of the reasons why it was brought in, if you don't mind me telling, is that they had the nonviolent demonstration that was there with puppets and all this stuff going on. And 2 of the people get arrested for disturbing the peace with puppets. I'm not sure how that happens, but. But then we started thinking about it, and we were thinking, what peace were they actually disturbing? And then we were looking at what disturbing the peace actually means, and who else has been arrested for disturbing the peace? Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mandela, and Malala right now. There's other people, maybe even not, but she's disturbing the peace in another way. And so we thought that there's another part of inspiring people to disturb the peace in this nonviolent way, and to actually show ways to do it through stepping through our fears. And so that's a part of the story that we really wanted to bring through.
And that brings up you segued right into the question I wanted to ask Ken and Suli. Sometimes people think that courage is the absence of fear, but courage is really acting even in the face of fear. And I wanted to know how you found the courage with your families and friends sometimes calling you traitors for doing what you did.
Yeah, it's the question of being courage or being a coward is something that is, is with me for many, many years. And it's a huge question, but I must be honest and tell you that, first of all, I don't feel courageous, and I don't feel any altruism in this activity. I mean, Desmond Tutu said that the forgiveness and being egoistic is the most altruistic thing you can do. To forgive and to take action for your own sake. And this is what I feel that I'm doing. It is not about altruism and I don't feel courageous. On the contrary, I feel that most of the time I feel fear in these activities. And most of the time, the voices that I hear in my head, whether I'm a traitor or not, are much worse than the external voices that I hear. And that really troubles me, to question all the time, what is this action is, as you said, what this action is really, it really is. Is it against the fear? against the feeling of belonging, against guilt feelings, against what? What this action is. And I feel that, that the decision to take an action, not to remain passive. And for me, to remain passive is to go with the flow when in times of darkness, as we experience it. So to stand up and to say, and I will give you one example, okay? With my 2002, when I decided to refuse, I went to my parents to tell them, because as you saw in the film, I knew that the following day, my name will be in the newspaper as a traitor, as coup d'etat and military revolution, and I want my family to be prepared that their son is going to be, you know, in the media presented as a traitor. So I sat with my mother and I told her, listen, tomorrow there's going to be a huge, and the first question she asked me was, isn't it dangerous for you? And it was the first time that she asked me that, and I said, you know, in the last 13 years, I was in many, many dangerous places. I was shot at, and now you are asking me this? So, I don't know. That's my answer.
Yeah, well, I'm also, as Khan mentioned, well, I personally, as you saw in the film a bit, I joined the Palestinian struggle when I was 13, 14 years. Of course, I was afraid from being killed, of course, as a human, and from reactions of different environment. But I've been in a food hunger strike. Maybe the film, they don't talk about it in details. But when you decide to join the food hunger strike, as political prisoners, you choose to join, but you don't choose when this will end. There is a committee deciding when the hunger strike going to end, and that means you can die. So I learn a lot in jail, as it's challenging and difficulties, but also it's a learning journey for me that I learn a lot. So my entire worldviews and learning was in jail, and part of it was learning about other revolutions in the world. For example, we learn from, it's not just we learn about nonviolence, Gandhi, Mandela, and so on, but honestly, back in the days, I'm a little old now, we used to learn also about Che Guevara and different revolutions, mainly that I learned from history. I studied a lot of history in jail, that a few crazy people needed to make change. And that's, I believe, that's what should happen in Middle East as well, in other conflict zones. It needs some crazy people that will exit their comfortable zone. And it's challenging, as Khan mentioned, every day there's a lot of challenges interiorly, next to you, your neighbors, your friends. I had many friends from the jail time and from different timing, and some of them, they would be still friends with me because I had a credit, street credit, because I was in jail, that gave me a credit. But in the other way around, there are also some people that different me from in life or in Facebook, since we talk about like. But so it's really challenging, especially what you saw in the demonstrations during Gaza war. And these days also, in the time of tension, the people that hold the vision are just a few people, and that's really not easy, I admit. And, but for me personally, I feel peaceful with my conscience and my heart that I'm in the right path of the history. Especially that they're in the extreme right and the extreme left, they attack us all the time. Not physically yet, in generally. So I feel in the good path, and therefore we need the imagination and the dream. And actually this is very important, because if you look at the practical situation around you, it's depressing and dark time. But for me personally, and I assume Khan and many of our guys have kind of, I'm not logical in my case, so I follow the wind, and that's how I grow up, and feelings, because I can't count this with numbers. It's not numbers, it's not logic.
We haven't talked about this before, Soli, but right now there's still a wave of violence that's going on in the region, both both political violence and physical violence. And every week you read about young Palestinian kids who are going out and trying to stab Israeli soldiers and civilians, and many of them are getting shot and killed. They're 13, 14, 15 years old, a lot of them. I can't help but watch those news reports and know that they are Sully. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison when he was 14 years old. I guess, but when the sentencing came, you had just turned 15, so they gave you 15 for 15. Yeah, and he also came out of prison and realized that there was a completely different narrative. And I remember one of the first conversations we had, Sully was laughing, but it actually happens to be true, that he's the love energy in Combatants for Peace. And
I'm a director of the love part, not the director of the organization.
director of the love part of Combatants for Peace. But that is who he is, which is, quite extraordinary.
One thing I do want to say too is that part of bringing out in Sully and Ken, I remember going over there and then different combatants talking about the trust that they had put in Steve, in particular, and in Andy when they went over there, and how much it meant to them. They, I think, were surprised at how much they opened up. And it's really about the space that was being held. And I've watched Steve interview people, period. But the way that it was set up and the way that Andy set up the photography for it, there's different levels of communicating. And so I think what he did is reached into a different part of them and just allowed them to come up and be seen in a way that it was incredibly beautiful, which is what I believe you guys experienced. And it's something that, if you ask how the film was made, that's one of the things. You have to go into your soul and pull another soul out. So I want to do that. And Andy's following the shot between Jamil and his wife. I mean, it still blows us away every time when we start cracking up laughing, but.
It was hot in there.
But I don't know, was Guillermo was talking, or was Paul was saying that the movie, the movie wants to be birthed, and that's how it happens, and a lot of that kind of stuff just shows up.
Sometimes when we talk about, I will say sometimes when I talk about this oneness or this unity, I have to tell you, I say, do I really deep down believe this? Or is that bullshit? Is it bullshit? Can I look at you and think that you are the same as me? Can I look at you and think that you have the same aspirations? We have different backgrounds. We look different. We come from different places. Maybe you or someone in your family may have been a slave master and owned someone in my family in history. Can I really believe that we can be the same? Are we really on the same path? Can love really conquer all? Sometimes I think that and I look at someone and I say, how deeply do I believe that? Then I had a dream that night. I had a dream that I was on a beach in Jamaica and I was going to meet Bob Marley for some reason. And there was a bonfire. And before he came, I could feel his spirit come, and I was looking in, there was a mirror. I don't know why there was a mirror on the beach, but a mirror by the bonfire, and I was looking in it, and I started looking, and I saw the faces change. I saw me. I knew that I am me. The me was there, but all the faces, and I saw all the faces of me as a man, as a woman, as a person from a different country, as a person. I went back centuries seeing me, and I thought, yeah, there is something to that. The thing that was so powerful for me in this movie, when you were afraid to go into the Palestinian area, and you were afraid to go into the Israeli area, and you started learning about the other people, and started thinking, and your mother said, when someone bleeds, I know the grief of that other mother, and you started thinking about things like that. How, that's not easy. It's not easy. I'd just like for you to talk about that.
Well, I think, and maybe you heard this in the film Avner, I'm personally one of the founders, so I have a special relation to Avner and Khin because we are the oldest in the organization, not by age. So we passed through all this journey back in the days together, and the practical logistical arrangements, it take a lot of adventure soul. There is no solution for all the dangerous moments. There is no fully solution or security. Even though we came back from military background or fighting background and jail, so we understand security, but still, things can happen in this kind of situation. So somehow you need to let it go and just go and do it. Of course, we consider like the practicalities and the logistic. We take into consideration all the security arrangements, for example, to bring the Israelis from Beit Jala to Bethlehem, which is area A, so it's illegal. And also, I'm talking about 2005 and 6, during the second Intifada, where some of our friends, some people were with me in jail, they were in the church in Bethlehem, in the, what you call it? They were under a siege, yeah. And they were shooting between Gilo, the Israeli South Jerusalem, and Bethlehem. So it was dangerous moments, but some revolutionary spirit needed, as I said, and because of our background and our past and our experiences, to be afraid doesn't let us stop. And this is what leads us. And also the hope is really important to bring it here, because it gives us a lot of hope, even though the beginning it was very hard to listen to each other's stories. But as you see now, we are close to each other more than maybe to other Palestinians and other Israelis. And that's why in the Gaza war, there were normal Palestinian demonstrations and normal Israeli anti-Palestinian demonstrations. We just joined the joint demonstration. That shows the third narrative, the third voice, the new conversation. And that's where we don't want to feel or to behave victims and to take responsibility over our action and bring our destiny into our hands. And this is a huge, deep, spiritual transformation that happened to each one of us with different details. But this is very long stories, and in my case, I'm writing a book about this with a friend of mine, because it's really a lot of details to tell in a few minutes.
I think, Chaz, what you're asking is, what are the moments, if I understand correct, what is helping us to see the other in ourselves? What it takes to see the other in ourselves. So for me, Combatants for Peace, and when we are talking about violence, we are talking about, the Combatants for Peace actually is a movement of post-traumatic people from both sides, because when it comes to violence, it doesn't matter if you are the victim or the perpetrators. We are all victims of violence. And for me, as a post-traumatic person from violence, and I think that's actually the infrastructure for the intimacy in the movement. The intimacy over the thing that we know deeply, that we share the same feeling, the same memory, the same trauma. And I will give you one example, which is quite recent for me. It was 6 years ago when my smallest little child was born. And when he was 3 months old, he had meningitis. So he was 3 months old, and all of a sudden, we woke up in the middle of the night. He has this thing in his forehead. It's like burning, very hot. It's the middle of the night. We are rushing to the hospital, driving in empty Tel Aviv streets in the middle of the night, getting to the hospital. And my knees are shaking, and my wife holds him in her hand next to me. We are getting to the hospital, and there's the guy in the gate, saying to me, open the window, and I'm saying, my child. And he's like taking his time, looking at her and looking at the child. And what I feel inside me is that if he won't open the gate in 2 seconds, I'm going to either, drive over the gate or kill him or something, what comes first. So, and then he sees, and he opens up the gate. And while we are crossing the gate, the first thing that comes to my mind, while I'm terrified, is all these people that were in that condition when I was in his position. When people came and said, my baby is sick, my wife is sick, my children, and so on, and I couldn't see them. And I all of a sudden realized at the moment that I'm, terribly anxious and terrified about my baby, thinking about these people that were, this is how they felt, like how I feel right now, terrified about my child, my own child. And I was like, you don't have a permit, go. And even it was 8 years after I refused to, 9 years after I refused to serve, and 5 years after we founded Combatants for Peace, and it's still an ongoing process for me.
I think Chaz also, I think your question's such a great question, and it's really, in many ways, the heart of the movie. Because Sully talked about not seeing themselves as victims. And one of the most powerful things that these guys do in all of their work is they don't place anybody as the perpetrator and anybody as the victim. They realize that the narrators are stuck in this cycle, but it's not who they have to be. And when you go to one of their actions, and you see like those soldiers coming in and throwing the stun grenade and having their weapons there and everything else, their response is not to make them the enemy. When you see the people yelling at the rallies, calling them traitors and whores, and it's much worse. I mean, filming in those circles I felt more rage than I've ever felt anywhere. And that was Israelis against Israelis. But what they do is to not turn them into the enemy, but actually to have compassion for how they got to where they are. And even in the invitation that Chen talks about in the film, seeing them as the prisoners, seeing the military as the prisoners, as the ones who are stuck in the middle, as the ones who are playing out a role in somebody else's story. To have the compassion and to know that they always have the ability for transformation. As Chen says, we know it because it happened to us, even in the most radical moments. That's that sense of unity. That's seeing the other in themselves and transcending this story of it being black and white or duality. And that's really the space that they hold.
What is, oh, you can, okay. Roger said, never step on anybody's applause. So what's going to happen with this movie? What's the next steps?
So this film is, I don't know that this is public yet, so this is just a secret between a few of us.
Don't put this on
So don't-
Ebertfest,
Exactly. But the film will be having its premiere in the Middle East in July. And it'll, you're all welcome to join us. And we are in the process of submitting to other festivals, and the intent is for this film to reach as many people as possible and to create as much conversation and dialogue as possible. As Marcina said, it's both, this film for us is, I always thought about it less as a movie or a film and more as a experience of transformation. And the idea was to allow us to in some small measure, in an hour and a half, experience the process that these guys went through, which was to be stuck in a story, to feel that national narrative, to feel that place where, as Marcina said, micro, macro. So this pertains to all of the stories we have about who our partner is, our spouse, our boss, our children, and all of that. Like to feel where we're stuck in those narratives and how we act from that place, without the judgment of it being bad or good, but just to see how that works. and then to realize that we're just playing out a story. It's all illusion. That the reality that we think is a concrete reality is just a story. And then the ability to move through that and to manifest a different narrative, which is what they're doing. So the idea is to bring this film out, to do a theatrical release, and then to have it screen in communities really all over the world, to have it screen in synagogues and churches and mosques and university campuses. We're thrilled that in our first 10 minutes of being at this amazing place, I can't wait to come back here, Chaz, but within 10 minutes of being in Champaign-Urbana, we were in the middle of the courtyard. We met a group of students, the first students we talked to, and they had a booth up that said "Building Bridges." Are you guys here? Students, you guys are here, right? All right. So they have an alliance, Illini Student Alliance for Israel and Palestine. So to engage in these dialogues at the level of the Middle East and Israel and Palestine, of nonviolence, and also just the ways in which we create our own experience of life.
We are going to open the question and answer session to the audience. We have microphones that are going around. And they will tell us when they have someone that they've given the microphone to.
I have a question to your far right, or far left, sorry, far left.
And can you stand up when you ask the question,
Sure.
please?
I just wondered if Jamil's wife is on board now with the program.
We actually, Marcina and I were there recently, as I said, in January, and we were going to meet with Avner and Jamil in Jerusalem. There were a couple of things we needed to pick up from them. And Jamil, he's one of the most, he's an unbelievable guy. He has the biggest heart you can imagine. He's like a big teddy bear. And he works as a contractor, and he works mostly in Jerusalem. And we were going to meet him in Jerusalem. He lives in Dehesha, which is the refugee camp next to Bethlehem, near Jerusalem. He actually was too afraid to come over. So think about this. Because a lot of our mainstream narratives are the Israelis are in fear, okay? Jamil's a Palestinian. He says, I have 3 kids. I don't want to be killed. And there was so much violence against Palestinians. A week before that, he had in his contractor's job, he was working there, and he had a friend who would pick him up and bring him back to the checkpoint so that he didn't have to deal with the buses. And there was one day that the friend was late. He decided he'd get the bus, and he's walking across the street. Somebody from the military comes at him with his weapon raised. And he was afraid, the way we'd all be afraid. So we went to Dehesha, and we spent the day with Jamil and with Fatima, his wife. And she's an amazing woman. And she's so important to this film because she shows us something that subverts what our ideas of a Palestinian man and woman in their home. And she represents the frustration and the anger, but the anger being her desire for something different. And we spent the day with her and talking through all of this, and she went through this transformation of saying, I don't hate them. I just don't like the behavior. But she could feel this idea of why they're stuck where they are, and we're so grateful for her to be a part of this film.
I forgot to say one thing. One of the most touching moments in the movie to me was, I forget her name, who was thinking about being a suicide bomber and talked to her daughter, Shifa. And when Shifa is talking to her daughter after she's out of prison and they're making the tea, and she's saying, I remember talking to you and telling you I was going to be a suicide bomber, and the daughter says, how could I have been okay with that? If you told me that today, I would shoot you, you just see the hope in the new generation.
And this morning we had an amazing women's panel. And one of the things I talked about was the women's role. And a lot of times when we're looking at violence, you see it. You see all the males there, and they're fighting each other, blah, 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 blah. Where are the females? And And I still think it's really important because one of the things I say all the time is we are the mothers of the men who are at war. We have more power than we think. And so I think even in watching that, it's what role are we playing in this conflict as women? And I think it's really important for us to gather and have those conversations as well.
Where is the next question?
Over here to your right.
Hi. When my husband and I were in Chicago, we met two directors, stayed with them from the Christian Peacemaker teams. They are over there to help both sides, not to promote Christianity. I wanted to know if you were familiar with them. They would be good allies. And I have waited a long time for this movie. We can't get it on TV.
What is the name of the organization?
The Christian Peacemaker teams.
Anyone familiar with?
Yeah. Yeah, we know the organization. We actually lately had a communication from this organization near Nablus. Okay, so just to explain this, we had 7 regional groups, and I have a news for you. In 2016, actually, we also together decided to have a women group, just women group, in order to encourage women participation in the organization. And we admit we have to work more for this. This is one thing. And the 6 groups are like the Theater of the Oppressed group, and then regional groups. One of them is Nablus Tel Aviv group. It's always joint groups, half Palestinian, half Israeli. So I know that a few weeks, your organization contacted us near Nablus to cooperate with them, because in that area we built gardens in the name of a daughter of Bassam Aramin. He is one of our founders that his daughter got killed, shot by Israeli soldier in 2007. So on her name we make gardens for kids in different isolated villages, playground. And that's how your team communicated with us. And I saw them also in the Freedom March all the time taking pictures. That's how I know the organization.
You know, we have to get Andy Young to the airport, so he wants to say something. And if his driver is out there, or the volunteer who's driving him, we didn't realize the time. So we're going to continue the conversation, but will you please?
No, I hope you continue the conversation for a long time. There's a lot to talk about. I just want to say that, I'm grateful for Steve for inviting me into this process, which at the beginning seemed so daunting, and what could we possibly do that would contribute anything to all the noise about this region. And it wasn't until we met these guys and knew that they were the real deal that we knew that the story would actually tell itself. And I came into the project almost regretting going over there, like, oh my God, this is going to be depressing, it's going to be difficult. I had anxiety about it. And the amazing thing is that every time I came back from the region, I felt elevated and hopeful. From coming back from one of the most conflict-ridden places on earth, and somehow I was coming back feeling hopeful. And it's because of the work that these guys do. You know, they have jobs, they have families, and yet they are tireless. They stay at this day in and day out, even when they're beaten down by their societies. They get stronger, and that gives me amazing strength. So I just, really want to say thanks to them. All I did was show up with a camera. So thank you to you guys.
Thank you.
And I hope you guys keep the conversation going. Thank you, Chaz, for a wonderful festival. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Before we do that, I want to tell you something about the handkerchiefs, so you don't think I'm just, oh, she's giving an award. Ann Rogers' handkerchief, what is that about? Sometimes when I come to the festival, on the first day, I wear Roger's white scarf as sort of a memento of him. I call it my boyfriend scarf. And when I went to get the scarf this time, something said, don't take the scarf, take the handkerchiefs. I didn't know why, so I just went with it. And then it occurred to me that, you know, the award that we gave out is the Golden Thumb, but we tried to get a different award because we want the humanitarian award to be different, and we still may change it at some point and give you a separate award because the Golden Thumb is the filmmaker award, but the humanitarian award, if we continue with it, will be something different. What I wanted to do actually is in the award that we tried to get, but they couldn't make it in time, we were going to embed something of the quote about Roger and empathy and, you know, walking in another person's shoes and from that first person point of view. And so at some point, we will probably have we're going to give you something embroidered with a separate award. But right now, you have the Golden Thumb and the white handkerchief symbolizing humanitarianism and empathy. So that's what that's about.
I just want to say thank you, Chaz. And the gift for us is, and Guillermo said this the other day as well, the gift for us is being here with you guys. You guys are really, I mean, you work so hard on telling a story, making a film, and you have really no idea how it's going to play or how it's going to be received, and yet you feel a tremendous responsibility to these guys and everybody else. But the reason we made the film was to have this conversation, this dialogue, and also to understand that this is really important. When Maytal, one of the combatants, when she and Jamil are introducing Desmond Tutu at the memorial service, and she makes a comment that we are not only the victims of this conflict, we're its creators. And it is that element of taking responsibility. But there's something beyond that, which is our need to take responsibility as well. Because, I'll just share a really short story if that's okay. We were with Suli in the West Bank. We were in Chizma, which is where he grew up. And then we were going to another location, and we were driving all along past several checkpoints, past Kalandia and some other checkpoints. And this was during the Gaza war. And there were, as you would come by the checkpoints, you would see about 100 yards up from the checkpoint, you'd see all of the young people, young Palestinians gathering stones. It was it was a Friday, just before 11 o'clock. And then you'd come 100 yards down and you'd see the international press with their tripods and their cameras and their riot gear on, getting ready. And then 100 yards below them, you would see the Israeli military getting their weapons and the rubber bullets and the tear gas and the stun grenades and everything ready. And it reminded me of a conversation that Suli and others had with the press, inviting them to come to a nonviolent demonstration. And the press said, look, we're not really interested in the nonviolence, but if you're going to go into a settlement and there's going to be some violence, then we'll bring a camera and see what happens. Remember that for a second. So here's the scene at the checkpoint. And what strikes me in that moment is that the press really doesn't care what they're reporting. If you think about the economics of the media industry, what they need to do is to sell advertising. The only way they can sell advertising is to get eyeballs on the screen. It's all metrics, right? So if we wanted to watch, the Yule log 24 hours a day, that's what they'd give us. But that's not what we want to watch. And if we wanted to watch and we cared about hearing about stories like what these guys are doing, they'd give us that too. But what they know is that violence sells. So what struck me in that moment is that none of that would be there if it weren't the television crews. It is scripted. It happens every Friday like clockwork. It's just it's like watching a play. And the play is being put on for us. So our ability to spread stories of hope and optimism, of coexistence, of people who do see that unity, who look beyond separation, and to demand that from our media, to spread those stories, to get those messages out, that is how we can become disturbers of the peace. That's how we can demand and we can take responsibility for what we participate in creating and move beyond that and to allow a new narrative to emerge. One of the ways that you can do it also is, I just want to mention this and then I'll get back to Chaz, is you can go to disturbingthepeacefilm.com. As we said, it hasn't come out yet or anything, and you can put your name on there and we'll make sure to keep you up to date as it starts to come out and you can engage your community and others with it.
I just got the signal that we have time for only one more question, so
From the balcony to your right.
balcony
Right here?
to the right.
It was interesting that at least 3 of the Palestinians started their road toward peacemaking in prison. And I wondered how that happened. Was that an individual enlightenment? Was it a part of a prison program? Was it the result of jailers who were already on their road to finding peace? Just what brought it about in prison?
Well, if I understand you correctly, I would say on the non-violence Palestinian struggle, it doesn't start from jail. It actually started during the British colonialism, British mandate, before 1948, before the whole thing with Israel started. And one of the main principles that we learn, I learned it from my mom and my family and my grandfather and so on, something we call tasmud. In Arabic, it means steadfast, or in Hebrew, tahzik mamad. So you understand the meaning. This is really the roots of the non-violence that already exist in our culture and our political culture and history. And this is actually not even about politics. It's even have something to do with the weather, with the personal condition, with the economy, talking about spirituality and how to be strong. What would you call it here? I don't know. We shall overcome. Somebody, a friend of us from New York, sent me this song to use it in our Freedom March. Yes, to use it as an anthem for the Freedom March. We will think about that. But from our side of the world, we have like different ways in the culture that I want to say. This is connected to the olive trees and za'atar. I came from a village where my family, I grew up with the land, the love of the land, like salt and water. And in the hunger strike in jail, that's how I learned nonviolence, using exactly salt and water. Because in the hunger strike, in the food hunger strike, you just drink a lot of water with a little salt. That's how you stay alive. Otherwise, you die. And it's really famous in our struggle to use salt and mayo milh in Arabic and Hebrew, almost the same. Some Palestinian prisoners, yes, I want to make sure the jail doesn't make you a little Gandhi. That's not really a rule. Otherwise, somebody will say, okay, let's put all Palestinian Israelis in jail. They would love each other. So many people said that. But I want to say that this is not exactly what happens. Jail made people went out different. Some of the people that came back to fight were in jail. I know some of them. Some people like myself. And it doesn't have to be the same all the time. But I think as a Palestinian, like we, beyond the combatants for peace and join non-violence movement, when I talk about responsibility and self-critique, because our people have been under Israeli control for ages, and before that the British mandate, before that the Ottomanic era, so we got used to be under oppressed all the time. So our people are traumatized, and many of them became now just thinking of victimhood and not to do anything because they believe they can't change anything. What we try to do, and talking about recent events, you talk about the last stabbing and the last round of violence, like two things. In the media, and talking about the media, I read Hebrew because I was in jail, so I read the Hebrew media and the Palestinian media. Reading about Hebrew media, about all the last events, the report is just the same, and the video, that a Palestinian guy or a girl came to stab Israeli soldier or settler, and what can they do? They shoot him. I just turned to the Palestinian one, Ma'ani News or other ones, the same story, at the same time. It says this: Israelis shoot a Palestinian guy or a girl, and then they throw a knife next to him to legitimize the killing. This is more or less most of the stories, how we receive it in the media. And now, I guess 2016, we have the alternative media and the social media that really helpful a lot. And that's why we try to send out our message now through Facebook and other means and Twitter. And I wanted to say also, we need what we try to say to, and that's why the critique of some people comes. We don't say to people to accept what you call it in English, status quo. Okay, thank you. We try to make change, and that's why the people have enough reasons, especially in the Palestinian side, to be frustrated. There are enough suffering and pain. The question how many people can overcome this pain and see the other side as a human and work together. That's a big thing. When I was in jail, I was reading from Jesus until Gandhi about love your enemy. That's not something simple. Take from me ages and hunger strikes and reading and meetings the other side and so on until where you see where I am now. But that's really, we don't want to wait everybody to go through the same journey. That's a long way. This is really long, long way. But we try to advocate our people to take this anger energy, which is legitimate, to non-violence path. And that's why we started the Freedom March every month in order also to critique the violence that comes from our side with all the legitimacy, and we can explain it and why people are frustrated and so on. We don't want, and we saw some politicians in the film, the honest talk here is that we are a grassroots movement. We don't represent the governments on the other side, and we try to make change through this non-violence movement. And in the end, we need a lot of forgiveness. And you know, there is a big slogan in Bethlehem, I finish here, called, in Bethlehem on the wall, there is like a certain slogan. One of them is just, maybe it's naive for Middle East mindset a bit, but this is really how I think, in the end of the day, talking about social justice and fairness and forgiveness, it says, make love, not war. And this is really what we try to do, in other words.
There's another slogan on the wall which has become very important to us and is in our poster, which is love wins.
And there's something that I was woken up at 5:30 in the morning to, which is war, just like love, is not inevitable. We have to choose it.
Thank you. Thank you for trusting your film to Ebertfest. Thank you.